For those of you who might not be familiar with our Stream Health Initiative project, the goal of this project is to develop strategies for improving stream health in the county. And we're really doing this in collaboration with all of you as members of the community, and also with the technical expertise of professionals from other organizations. And so we are really pleased to have some of those professionals with us today to talk about opportunities for landowners, and specifically cost share and conservation programs that will benefit stream health. So with that, I would like to introduce Luke Longenecker, who is the Conservation Programs Manager for the Thomas Jefferson Soil and Water Conservation District. And we also have today Corey Kirkland, who is the District Conservationist for the Nrcs. And lastly, I want to introduce Bobby Weitzcarver, who is a farmer and conservationist from over in the Valley. And he's going to share some of his personal experience with some of these conservation practices on his land. So I will turn it over to Luke, who's going to start us off.
All right, thank you, Kim. Well, as Kim said, my name is Luke Longenecker. I'm the Conservation Programs Manager with the Thomas Jefferson Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm going to touch on a few things today. I'm going to go over just the general history of conservation districts and what those are, to kind of give a foundation of what we are as an organization and how we've kind of evolved over time. I'll touch on some of our programs and services, our implementation efforts, and some BMP examples, and kind of wrap up with some of our success by the numbers. So what is a conservation district? Conservation districts were formed in the 1930s in response to the Dust Bowl. And the whole idea was to create local influence. And that was done through electing local directors to serve local landowners in order to make local decisions for local programs to affect the local area. Overall, there's 3,000 soil and water districts in the United States. There's 47 here in Virginia, and over 98% of the land in the U.S. is covered by a soil and water conservation district. Thomas Jefferson Soil and Water District was established in 1939. We are a political subdivision of the state. We're governed by a locally elected board of directors, and we are a member of the Virginia Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts. Our district area, which is the exact area that Corey covers as well, the Natural Resource Conservation Service. We cover 4 counties: Albemarle, Louisa, Nelson, and Fluvanna, and the city of Charlottesville. We have 10 elected directors, 2 from each locality, and then we have 2 at-large directors that are appointed by the board, as well as 5 associate directors. All the work we do goes through the board as the voting members of our agency. We do a variety of programs. I'm going to mainly stick to agriculture and rural lands as the scope of today's work. But other projects we work on are residential assistance, youth and adult education, stormwater and land conservation, and easements, as well as some erosion and sediment control and stormwater plan review. A bulk of our funding for our agriculture programs comes through the Department of Conservation and Recreation. That's funding our agriculture cost share program from the state. We also get funding from federal grants, local grants, localities, and other sources as well. And our primary goal with these best management practices are to improve and protect water quality, conserve soil, and improve farm management through voluntary incentive programs. We've had a lot of success working voluntarily with our farmers and landowners, providing education and showing them the benefits of these programs, both for water quality and the overall farm in general. Just some big picture numbers statewide. In the last 10 years, we've protected over 10,000 acres of buffer area and 2,400 miles of stream statewide. We have over 50 practices available to landowners and residents in our area, and we all follow it for any soil and water conservation district receiving funding from the Department of Conservation and Recreation has the same practices available on a statewide level. We have 50 available. They may not all be applicable to this area. This is just kind of a snapshot of our top 9 practices we do in a given year. This is a snapshot of what we did last year, and as you can see, one of our biggest programs that we offer are stream exclusion and alternative watering systems. We also do cover crops and cropland conversion and a number of other practices, but I kind of just wanted to give you a snapshot of these. And we provide cost share to get these projects done. and just kind of defining what cost share is. Essentially, every single practice has a different reimbursement rate based on what is set by the state. Those vary in range, the lowest being around 50 to 60% on up to some projects that we are able to cover the entire cost of that best management practice. And so I'm just going to touch on some examples of kind of some of the projects we do. I like pictures that kind of demonstrate kind of the before and after and kind of the goals overall. So one of the main ones we do are livestock watering systems and stream fencing. And the programs have really changed over the years. It used to be we put up some fence, we put in 1 or 2 water troughs, and that was all we were able to offer. We really have expanded those programs. So we're looking at, the areas along the stream. We're looking at the upland areas and providing resources and tools to better improve the overall grazing land management of that farm. We have a lot of resources. We provide technical education to producers and farmers to kind of best management practice, best management on their land, and kind of looking at the upland area as well as the area adjacent to the stream, because what's going on upstream, up above the stream has a direct impact of what goes into the stream. So providing them with some tools and infrastructure and education to talk about stocking rates and grazing land management, so you have an overall better quality pasture or upland area, which is going to increase water infiltration, reduce runoff, and just have a better stabilized area up above our streams. So just kind of running through some BMP examples, just some before and afters, kind of working through the program to protect some of our stream areas. This picture to the top is a herd of animals that have been moved to a pasture recently as part of a rotational grazing system. In the shadow, it kind of blocks it, but that's a 5-year-old tree planting done adjacent to that pasture land to protect that stream area. Bottom left is kind of representing that rotational grazing system where livestock no longer have access to the streams. They have off-site watering system and multiple fields to rotate through, enabling the producer to rest the majority of the fields and graze 1 or 2 in that rotation. Bottom right is a recently excluded stream with some trees planted along it. In addition to kind of, just fencing out the streams, we can provide a lot of other resources to address the resource concern on any given farm. We not only just fence streams out, we kind of fix erosion problems and a number of other things. This is a before and after picture on a project Cor and I worked on. We probably started out there 5 years. It's in southern Albemarle County. The previous landowner had pretty much let the farm go, and it had gotten to the point where there's just severe erosion across the entire property. And so Cor and I worked with them. Part of our job is to meet with the landowners, come up with objectives and goals based on what that producer is trying to accomplish and trying to fit the appropriate practice with that goal. So we did a lot on this farm. We installed a rotational grazing system. We got all the livestock out of these streams and ponds. We planted different plantings along each buffer area. And this kind of shows you the change. That pond was muddy year round, regardless of if we were in a drought or not. We came in and got the livestock out of there, planted a bunch of trees, did some erosion control and stabilization. You can see the same oak tree in each picture and a 4-year difference in that transition. Looking past the streams and kind of more of that upland practices and what we have available, we also work on a lot of cropland acres, as that is a predominant land use in our area. We also do some animal waste practices as well. And I'm kind of just running through some of the examples of the conservation programs we have available. Cover crops is a big push for us, and it's a big goal of ours to get producers to plant cover crops on their cropland in the fall. This enables a small grain crop to be planted and be on the soil over the winter months. This is good for soil health. It uptakes excess nutrients that are left over from the previous crops, and it stabilizes that site during the winter months when we see high levels of rainfall. We do some cropland conversion, converting row crops, typically corn and soybean in this area, to perennial pasture, perennial hay, or trees, pine or hardwoods. Typically, this is consolidated to some of the more unproductive pasture. There was a lot of land put into crops, 10 or 15 years ago when crop prices skyrocketed, and a lot of times those areas aren't best suited for a row crop operation. So that is one option we can offer them to convert it to some other use. We do tree plantings upland and along streams. We do nutrient management plans for crop operations. We do grass waterways, which are used to adjust erosion on pasture and cropland as well. And then on some of our large livestock operations, we do some animal waste facilities to give them the ability to feed in a consolidated area on concrete where they can control that manure and prevent all that runoff into the streams. We're also getting more into working with equine operations and trying to manage waste in a better way on those farms. This is a farm in Albemarle County that produces a lot of horse manure, and it's hard to manage that just in general. And in this situation, they were piling it up in one location, and then this is what they had as the best spot at the time. But every time it rained, that manure was washing downstream and eventually into a perennial stream. So we worked with them to plan out their goals, and we ended up installing a 3-bin compost facility where you have 6 months of storage, and through rotation and turning of that manure, you're actually finishing with a good compostable product at the end, and that's all contained within those bins and not running off into those streams. Last BMP I'll touch on is one we see a lot of. I'm sure you've all seen in the areas where there's heavy livestock traffic or equipment traffic and slopes. It's hard to maintain a perennial cover on that ground. We work with this producer to address that issue and providing a way to stabilize some of those eroded slopes. The slope to the top left is the same as the one on the bottom left, and probably over the last 15 years, they've lost over 2 feet of topsoil on this slope. So we work with them to do a lot of shaping and grading and stabilization and give them a way to continue to use this access area, but consolidate it and stabilize it and move animals back and forth in a better way. That's kind of a summary of our big picture projects. We can answer questions at the end. I did just kind of want to give a scope of where we're working and what we're working on just overall in Albemarle County. This is a little bit dated. This is from a year ago, but this kind of highlights projects under construction, projects completed since 2010 and then prior to 2010. And they look scattered and there doesn't seem much rhyme or reason to it. But if you look at this next slide where it incorporates the land use across the county, we're primarily working in crop and hay and pasture fields, open space. This kind of puts it into perspective of those areas and where we're working. Kind of looking at, overall, this is a snapshot we do each year. This was our snapshot for last year, fiscal year 2020. We've been very fortunate over the last 3 to 4 years to get a lot of funding from different agencies, especially the state. There's a big push right now to do a lot of best management practice work in Virginia. We paid out over $1.7 million in cost share to landowners last year. We allocated over $2.8 million in new projects. We planted over 52 acres of trees, protected over 166,000 feet of stream bank, created or protected almost 380 acres of riparian buffer, planted 3,600 acres of cover crop, and converted roughly 514 acres of cropland. Kind of stepping back and looking at it, since 1998, we've paid out almost $16 million for best management practices in our district. And I think just as critical, landowners themselves have put forth their own dollars to get this conservation work on the ground and have put over $6 million into conservation work since 1998. That has resulted in a lot of good benefits too that we like to point out are the almost 3,000 acres of riparian buffer protected and 261 miles of stream protected, equivalent of driving from Charlottesville to Yorktown and back. That's a summary of kind of what we do at the district and some of the cost share programs available. I'm going to turn it over to Corey, and he's going to talk about Nrcs and their programs next.
All right, thank you, Luke. Let me get this pulled up real quick here.
While Corey's getting set up, I'll just remind everyone to go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end.
Okay. Luke and I's agencies do very similar work. So a lot of this is going to look kind of the same, but we'll touch on some of the main differences. And I've also got some pictures at the end to share with everyone. So first of all, my name is Corey Kirkland. I work for the Natural Resources Conservation Service. It's a small agency within the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I work out of the Louisa office and serve Albemarle and Nelson counties. Similar to Luke's agency, the Natural Resources Conservation Service was created in the mid-30s during the Dust Bowl era, and it was primarily created to help the folks in the Midwest, the South and the East with some of their erosion issues, again, related to the Dust Bowl and severe water erosion in the South and East. It was recognized that if we completely diminished our soil resources, that agriculture would not be sustainable in those areas, and it would lead to food shortages, poverty, migration, and otherwise just leaving the land impractical to use. So we needed another set of boots on the ground with the tools and technology at the time to help address some of those erosion issues locally. Our agency is found throughout the United States and is represented through local USDA service centers that typically serve multiple counties. So what is NRCS and what do we actually do? Well, our primary mission is to provide technical assistance to agricultural producers, both rural landowners and urban landowners that face issues related to natural resource concerns. Some of those concerns include soil health, water quality, wildlife habitat, and nutrient management and animal waste concerns. How do we do that? We typically meet, well, we're invited out to people's farms. We meet with those landowners, walk their properties with them, listen to their concerns, identify potential issues, discuss alternatives, and potentially write conservation plans to recommend conservation practices to address those resource concerns. The great thing about our agencies, this is Luke included, is our advice is free, it's non-regulatory, and all our recommendations are voluntary. So again, many times we are invited out to properties as advocates to agriculture and just for folks that are looking for help to address some of their concerns. So once we've learned more about a producer's concerns, existing management and goals, we've identified resource concerns that could be addressed, we kind of move into a planning phase. It's where we're going to wrap all of the observations that we've acquired and put them in a working document. It's basically a written record of management decisions and conservation practices that will be used to help address natural resource concerns. And I'll have some pictures a little later of some of that, those conservation practices and some of the work that we do. A conservation plan consists of a farm map, soils information on vegetation present, overall resource inventory of water, soils, plants, Possibly some survey and design information if we have some practices that we know will help address those resource concerns, the locations of those practices and a schedule of how to apply those practices, job sheets, specifications, operation and maintenance. Our case files can get pretty extensive. So here are some examples of our most common resource concerns by land use. And a lot of this is going to be similar to what Luke shared, but we'll mention it twice because it's that important. Some of our cropland resource concerns can include sheet, rill, and gully erosion, soil quality or decline in organic matter and biology, nutrient management, applying too much or too little nutrient when it's needed, and periods of fallow, as Luke mentioned, cover crops. Those are pretty important to maintaining a overall biologically active system, having living roots year round. Here are some examples of some of our pasture land resource concerns. Obviously, soil erosion and bank erosion due to animal activity, grazing and nutrient management concerns, overgrazing, overstocked pastures. Again, nutrient management, sediment nutrients and pathogens and surface water. All of those things can be found fairly commonly in most of our pasture situations. And we've got some tools where we can show, if a producer is trying to maximize profit, but with animal numbers, lots of times we can kind of show where that may not be the case when you consider overall utilization, the amount of time you're feeding through the winter, and all the additional inputs that particular system may require to be somewhat productive. We also get into, yes.
Excuse me, sorry. We've got a question that might be easier to answer right now from your last slide. That is, what is sheet and rill erosion?
So sheet and rill erosion essentially is where you're getting large surface areas of erosion, not necessarily defined channeling erosion such as gully erosion. This is more where you don't have enough existing cover. The raindrops are falling on the surface and you've actually got sheets of soil being washed away as opposed to confined gully channels. Hopefully that covered it. Some of our other work is within forestry and wildlife type land use areas. We do some reforestation. We do some afforestation as well. We do quite a bit of wildlife habitat work in the area where we're taking land from more intense to less intense use, and possibly even doing a full conversion from introduced species to native species. So this is another little thing that we kind of do. It's not really directly related to stream quality and health, but this is very popular with some of our smaller vegetable production. So in addition to technical assistance and conservation planning, we do have access to several financial assistance programs to help fund some of the recommended practices that we use to address those resource concerns. And just to name a few of those programs. The Conservation Reserve Enhancement Conservation Reserve Program can be used to assist with long-term perennial cover on cropland. And the enhancement component of that program can help to establish riparian areas in hay and pasture land situations. The EQIP program, Environmental Quality Incentive Program, covers a wide range of land uses and concerns and practices, and is our most commonly used conservation program. The Conservation Stewardship Program is for some of our producers that have already adopted many of the conservation practices that, but want to continue with some of their conservation work by further enhancing their natural resources or adopting new technologies and techniques. Typical cost share assistance through any of those programs can be anywhere from 50 to 75% of actual cost, with some special situations that can bring some additional funds. As Luke mentioned before, we do partner on a lot of projects where we are trying to maximize the benefits of both programs, whether they be the technical practices that are available or financial assistance. A lot of circumstances, maybe both. So it's great to be able to do that and, again, maximize those programs' potential. So typically this is kind of the steps to receiving our assistance. Again, we start with a plan. There's an application period. There's some eligibility associated with USDA programs and receiving our financial assistance. Typically, those aren't very limiting, and most of our producers don't have any issues becoming eligible. Because we don't have enough funding to really address all concerns, there's just limitations on funding. There's always more applicants than there is funding. So each application goes through a ranking process where we're basically trying to maximize bang for buck, for lack of better words. And then we can kind of, once an application is pre-approved, we can go to contract and implementation. Okay. And I'll just skip through this. We do accept applications year-round, and funds are typically allocated annually within a 6-month time period. Most of our payments are made after work is complete, so we actually reimburse the participant. Some of our socially disadvantaged customers can qualify for advanced payments, so that's another nice benefit of some of our programs. And we can also write multi-year contracts. So it's not expected that the landowner install all of these practices all at once, which can be limited, in tight budgets. So those are some nice benefits to working with our programs as well. So I did have some examples that I kind of wanted to run through, before and afters, if you will, similar to Luke. And a lot of these may have been partner projects as well, so that's even better. But here's an example of a feeding area that was directly adjacent to a stream corridor, where we were able to move the fence further away from the stream, restabilize that area, and then plant some native hardwood species back. Kind of looks like a moonscape. before. Okay, here's another feeding area where we actually constructed a feeding facility at the top of the hill to feed in and capture the manure and restabilize that hillside. That hillside was again adjacent to another stream corridor that at that time did not have any buffer. This was a partner project, and I think we were able to accomplish a lot of benefit out there. Here's an example of one of our pollinator plantings. This had been a field that had been grazed in the past that kind of was turned into some marginal hay ground. Again, because of the intensity of management, there's not a whole lot of opportunity for any native habitat quality there. Critters really can't use those large open areas that are, mowed for hay two or three times a season. So the landowner was interested in pollinators, and this is probably one of our nicer ones. This was established over about a year's amount of time from beginning to end, considering site prep, seeding, and then a little bit of management after seeding to control some competition. Here's another example of an area that had been timbered, and the leftover log deck was basically just there. All the topsoil had been either scraped away, washed away, or taken away. Not a whole lot of opportunity for things to grow there. So we were able to, using natives that are more adapted to ground that's of that quality in pretty poor condition, and establish some habitat on the log deck to better stabilize that area and provide some wildlife benefit at the same time. Just some pasture management, establishing a rotation within this large open field that had animal having access to that small tributary that eventually fed down into the Rivanna. And then below is an example of what some of our tree planting, our riparian plantings can look like over time. Yeah, it's not one of those things that you can kind of plant and forget. It does take some active management to make sure that those are successful, but this is pretty nice. Nice results. And this is an example of a stream crossing. Prior to this project being put in place, the cattle had full access to the stream corridor. There was no exclusion fencing. It was all grazed as one large unit. So in order to help protect that stream, we installed a stream crossing exclusion fence throughout this property. And because there were several streams on the property, it made setting up a grazing system pretty easy. We installed some alternative water troughs in some locations, and this was a success as well. And this was also a partner project with Luke and the Conservation District. We do get into some forage quantity and quality work as well. So the top left there is where a field had some clover incorporated. This field prior to, looking like that was pretty weedy. It had started to get some cedar trees growing in there. So we did a little bit of herbicide work to address some of the weedy competition, and followed that up with a clover planting to increase diversity and to also improve on the quality of the forage there, Again, the bottom left there is just another example of trying to establish or add on to watering systems to increase grazing potential, grazing management. They went ahead and put in, anyway, this entire field is cross-fenced with temporary polywire seasonally to increase grazing utilization, but it's also hayed early in the spring because of its size. So, and then here's an example of some of our invasive species work. These are some ailanthus trees that have been hacked and squirted, and a year after the fact, the bottom right shows all the dead stems, and hopefully we'll be opening that landscape up to some native trees that otherwise would not stand a chance competing with the ailanthus. So we do quite every farm has invasive species of some sort. So we do incorporate invasive species work in quite a bit of our contracts just to, hopefully return it to a more natural setting. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Corey. We're going to switch over to Bobby this time. And as we do, I'm just going to share a link to our website where we have some more information for landowners. And Bobby, you can go ahead and share your screen anytime.
Okay.
And for those of you who might not be able to see that, if you're on Facebook Live, it's at albemarle.org/streamhealth/information for landowners. And there's a lot of links there to these programs, but also to some other programs that we won't have time to talk about today. Things like the riparian buffer tax credit for forest management practices and conservation easements, and just a lot of other opportunities for landowners. So I encourage you all to check that out. I'll turn it over to you, Bobby. And
Okay,
also, please go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A if you have any.
Okay, can everybody see my screen? It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Luke and Corey, you did a good job. Thanks for all that good information. Jeannie and I bought a farm last year in Augusta County, and there are so many conservation programs available that the first call I made was to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, because they have some field people that work in the valley here. And they explained to me all the programs, and then I called our conservation specialist from the Headwater Soil and Water Conservation District and the conservation specialist from Nrcs to come out to the farm, and we discussed all the options available. And for us at that time, we decided to go with the state program. You can see the fence here that excludes Whiskey Creek. This was a 12-inch stay fence out of the floodplain, and we agreed to a 50-foot buffer and a 15-year contract, which for us resulted in 100% cost share of the watering system, the fencing, and the trees that we're getting ready to plant. On the left, you can see a map. It's a 150-acre farm. And this is Whiskey Creek along the north side, and we have an unnamed tributary here on the south. This is Route 42, and this is Whiskey Creek Road. That's just a picture of the farm, some of the barns. In this program, we, well, that's a picture of the former landowner who had cows in Whiskey Creek, and we believe in fence exclusion, healthy soil, and clean water. And so first thing we did was put up a 2-strand high tensile hot fence along the floodplain of Whiskey Creek, and then on the unnamed tributary we put up a woven wire fence. We have about a mile of fencing on this stream, and the beauty of the system is that if you fence the livestock out, the programs will offer us a design and an implementation of a livestock watering system. In this particular case, we drilled a well and put in about a mile of pipeline to 6 different watering troughs that were strategically located throughout the farm to give us distributed grazing throughout the farm. We put in Ritchie frost-free troughs, and that's just a picture of some of the construction. And one of the things that we did was put in these livestock watering corrals, where they're about 40 by 40 in size. We used guardrail that come in 26-foot sections, and then we used 14-foot gates. And this corral we have openings to 4 different pastures, which allows us to move the cattle through the watering corral. Now, the program didn't pay for the whole cost of these systems, because, you know, the conservation district would pay for board fence, but not for guardrail, which is a little more expensive. But we had the opportunity to enroll in another program with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, which is going to reimburse us for the difference in those costs. The program also pays for cross fencing. We put in an additional mile of cross fencing on this farm. So we have about 13 grazing units, which we subdivide even more with electric fence. This happens to be one of the first installations of pipe fence in the county, which is pretty unusual. You know, around here, it's pretty popular out west. Another thing that we did that was new to me was we used guardrail posts for our braces. And so this guardrail that you see, it's a 6-foot long guardrail post that they drive into the ground. You can see the top of it right there. They drove that all the way in the ground, and then they brace against that. So that far exceeds the specifications required. It's stronger, quicker to install, better, and it reuses those guardrail posts. And we are scheduled to plant about 9 acres of buffer this fall. We will start site prep next month, and we'll plant about 3,000 trees and shrubs in the fall. So I mentioned the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay program that's going to help us with additional costs. They also are helping us install new working pens. You can see there on the right, we have a brand new Calco head chute and pens that they're helping us build. And these are just a few shots of some of the people that have helped us. On the left is the national champions from the national fencing competition. And this gentleman right here is Jake Wilson. He's the owner of Wilson Fence Company that did all the fence building and the watering system on this farm. And over here is Dr. Walter Hilton. He helped us design the pens. And this is Graham, who installed some light fixtures to illuminate the working pens when we need to work cattle in the dark. So we couldn't have done this without these programs. Matter of fact, we probably wouldn't have bought the farm without knowing that we could get assistance from so many different organizations. The district and Nrcs, Chesapeake Bay Foundation helped us with the initial layout. They GPS the maps for us. And they did the measuring of all the practices and gave that to the conservation district for reimbursement. So we are really fortunate to have a really good team of conservationists helping us. And I know over there in the Thomas Jefferson district, you all have an excellent team as well. I've worked with both Corey and Luke many times, and they're good to work with. And we've had a great experience with all the programs, actually. So that's the end of my presentation. It's good to be with y'all, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Bobby, for sharing that personal experience. Really, really helpful to hear from you and from everyone else. If there's any questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. We've got a question from Laurel. And she's asking, based on what you've seen, what factors contribute to a producer deciding to establish a buffer in addition to fencing out the livestock?
I'd like to take a stab at that. You know, the number one reason that I think farmers get into these programs because we need more water distributed throughout the farm. So that's the most compelling reason for us. We would be underutilizing our pastures had it not been for these troughs strategically located throughout the farm. And we don't want our cattle drinking dirty water. And so, you know, there's a saying that the biosecurity program on my farm is only as good as the worst farm upstream if my cows are drinking out of the stream.
Thanks, Bobby. And I had a similar but opposite question for all of you, and then we'll get to Kirk, who has another question as well. But my question is kind of the opposite for, you know, farmers that you know or that you've worked with who are not willing to retain or install buffers or exclusion fencing. I guess what is the primary reason for that, or what's the biggest impediment or barrier that folks seem to have? And I open that to Bobby or Luke or Corey, anyone who wants to answer.
Well, I can tell you from my experience that the reasons that farmers don't do it is because they don't want change. And they don't, you know, they have this fear of the government telling them what to do. And it is complicated. And so if you just ask for help, people like Corey and Luke, I am sure that they will come out to the farm and help you and guide you through it. You know, and then the last reason I think is, you know, maybe they don't think they're contributing, you know, to the problem. And so I think more awareness and, you know, we've just got to keep going. It's a big job.
One of the biggest limitations, you know, as good as these programs are and as available as they are and the funding associated with them, you know, is available, not all of these programs fit every scenario. A lot of these farms are smaller farms. Their land is valuable to them with existing production that they have. They're concerned about giving up land, productive land. And, you know, we have some standards and some program limitations that sometimes just don't fit very well with every landowner. That being said, you know, I think we can show benefit to the overall production with exclusion. You know, it might be top of bank exclusion as opposed to actually installing buffers per se, but you know, just, you know, animal welfare, the water quality, you know, Bob, you mentioned biosecurity, all of those things really affect the quality and health of your animal. So, you know, even if this doesn't fit, every situation doesn't fit a program scenario, we can usually still show benefit of exclusion. And it might not require, you know, a 5-strand fence or a woven wire fence. It could be a 3-strand barbed wire fence that is right at the top of the bank, and we can usually show where that's beneficial.
Jump in and kind of add on to, I guess, both sides of that question. In addition to the, you know, water quality aspect and the animal health aspect of getting them out of the streams, I think a big driver is just relating it to the bottom line in production. And a lot of times going from a continuously grazed 100-acre farm to a managed intensive rotational grazing system is going to improve their overall grass production, pasture production on that farm. So, I mean, it's just the selling points are different for every operation. But, you know, when it comes down to it, you know, a big part of it is bottom line and, you know, overall production on that farm. Another big challenge we run into, I guess, as a challenge we always look to overcome is, you know, over 50% of the land that has livestock on it or crop on it is rented land. And there's, you know, they could be booted off that property in a year or 5 years or 10 years. It's an unknown. There's not a lot of long-term leases out there. 5 is about the longest you would get. And there's some hesitancy to try to adapt something on property they don't own. So we try to come up with a solution, work with the landowners and the farmers, but that kind of just depends on a case by case. And, you know, you also look at the average age of a farmer, you know, being Bobby, what is it, 70 years old at this point? And, you know, do they want to change? And, you know, are they going to change their operation at this point in their career? It's just, you know, there's a lot of factors that play into it. It's not just so simple as looking at it. Does it make sense or not?
I'll just add one more thing. That fence, excluding livestock from the streams, is an insurance policy against us losing a calf to mortality. When we're in calving season, and you know, most cows and heifers that get in trouble, they go to water to calve. And if it's cold, like when we have, you know, we calve in the spring, and when it's 32 degrees and raining and they calve and they can't get up because they're sucked into the muck in a wetland, or they can't get out of the ravine to nurse, they're going to die. And so, you know, you lose a calf today, that's $1,000. So we don't want our cattle in the hydric features for a lot of reasons.
Thanks, Bobby, and all of you. We've had 2 more questions come in. One was answered in the chat, but I'm gonna read it out anyway for those who might not have seen it. It was a question that is about how long was the application process for funding, and Bobby responded it was 2 months. I don't know if Corey or Luke, you want to add anything to that?
Sure, I can touch on it. Each agency has different funding cycles and different application, you know, deadlines. As long as funding is available, the Soil and Water District is typically approving projects on a monthly basis, pending funding.
Okay, and our last question that I'm seeing is from Christine. It says, why is there support for high tunnel systems? What are the conservation benefits?
So the main goal for high tunnel, the high tunnel program is to extend the growing season, and it's also being used to incentivize local food production, specifically in some areas that are, food deserts and that type of thing. So season extension is the primary resource concern there, and it's all in an attempt to try to increase food production in areas where there's not as much as needed.
All right, if there are any other questions, we have a couple minutes left. You can go ahead and put them in the Q&A. I'm not seeing any at the moment. I just want to say thank you so much to our 3 presenters for coming today and for sharing your knowledge. It has been really, really great. And I hope that folks will join us next week at the same time for our Stream Restoration 101. We are going to hear from some stream restoration experts. So I hope to see you then. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.